Happy politics, and welcome to that increasingly rare thing, a BC Poly hot stove that actually happens on Tuesdays as intended. My name is Maclean K. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Orca, and I'm joined in a socially distant manner by...
It's Jordan Bateman, VP Communications for the Independent Contractors and Businesses Association. It's sunny here. It's sunny here in Surrey, British Columbia.
It is also sunny here in beautiful Saanich, British Columbia. My blinds are closed all the way, otherwise it's all you could see. It'd be a bright white glare on my face. Jordan, when we started the Orca and when we launched BC Poly Hot Stove, one of the biggest stories was, you may recall, the mother of all by-elections. Do you remember this?
The mother? Oh, Nanaimo.
Yes, much. Yes, much road on the results of this, and we don't need to revisit that, but only to mention that, once again, by-elections will dominate the BC politics news for the next little while. One we know is happening, we're going to talk about that first, one that will be happening sometime in the next 6 months. We'll get to that second. The first, Vancouver Quiulchena. Premier John Horgan has called the by-election earlier than some predicted. It will be held this month on April 30th. This is the seat vacated by former BC Liberal leader Andrew Wilkinson and will be contested by the new BC Liberal leader, Kevin Falcon. What are your thoughts, Jordan? This is one of the most, I would say, winnable seats for the BC Liberals in the entire legislature. It would be a massive upset for anyone other than Kevin Falcon to win this thing.
Well, I mean, it's BC politics, so whatever the stupidest thing that's going to happen could possibly happen, probably will. No, I'm just kidding. Surprises abound, but there should be no surprise here. I mean, Quiulchena, you're right, is, if the BC Liberals only won 2 ridings, one would be Quiulchena in the province of British Columbia. It is as solid as it can be. Generally, the rule of thumb has been that sitting governments don't do so well in by-elections. That's kind of changed in recent years. There's another by-election that will come up that we'll talk about soon where that will actually be put to the test. But, Falcon, I can tell you, talking to the BC Liberal folks, Falcon's taking this very seriously. They've got a team on the ground already. They're working hard, not taking anything for granted. Working with Andrew Wilkinson, the former MLA there, to help that transition. So doing all the right things. Ultimately, it'll depend on who can get out the vote. But no, this is fairly safe. I don't even think the NDP or Greens have any foggy, hopeful notion that something weird may happen and one of them get elected.
Yeah, I think this is one of those things where it would take, and forgive me for fiddling with my screen because you've frozen again, so I'm going to take it on faith that you can see me and you can see me. If it's working on your end, no problem. This is, I think even the NDP in their wildest fever dream don't see them taking the seat from the BC Liberals. If that did happen, that would be a disaster of unmitigated proportions for the BC Liberals. But again, we're just talking about science fiction at this point. The NDP and the Greens both have their candidates. The Green candidate, her name is Wendy Hayco. She's an emergency management specialist. The NDP candidate is more interesting. She is the chair of political science at Douglas College. She's also the wife of Vancouver's mayor, Kennedy Stewart. Her name is Jeanette Ash. Again, nothing but best wishes and congratulations to everyone who steps forward, but there's very little chance that we'll be seeing anyone other than Kevin Falcon in the legislature next month.
Well, part of the theorizing that's gone on post this announcement and post Jeanette Ash's selection as the candidate is that, obviously there is a municipal election this fall. Kennedy Stewart is running. Yeah. And what better way to renew the Kennedy Stewart infrastructure in Quiulchena than to have a candidate very close to him run? And the NDP are different than the BC Liberals in that the NDP are actually vertically integrated. So a federal NDP and a provincial NDP, they share lists. They share information, voter information. They share voter ID. They all use the same firms, usually Stratcom or something like that. There's that kind of ecosystem that they have developed as far as that goes. So, the very politically cynical, I'll call him George Affleck for the sake of this conversation, would say, it's very clear that this is a list building exercise. I'm not so sure. She, obviously, if you're the chair of poli-sci at a college, if you're, she's also on the board of, I think, the Atira Housing Corporation, which one of the biggest, I was going to say subsidized rent, but it's not really that. But low-income housing organizations in the province, works a lot with BC Housing. Like, clearly, she must have an interest in this beyond her husband. So, it's interesting. It makes me raise an eyebrow a little bit. It's another example of how the Kennedy Stewart folks are about a mile ahead of the center-right as far as winning in November or October. But again, in Quiulchena, anyone other than a free enterprise candidate, you might as well give them a blindfold and a cigarette and send them on their way, right? Like it's such a difficult demographic for them to win.
Yeah, it would be as if, what's the NDP equivalent? Is it Vancouver Kingsway, which is Adrian, or Vancouver Mount Pleasant, perhaps even more so? It's just, there are some ridings in this province that are just, they're baked in, and it would require a seismic shift for another result, and Quiulchena is one of them.
Would you like a fun fact about Mount Pleasant?
I always want a fun fact. I will never say no to a fun fact.
It's neither a mountain nor terribly pleasant.
I've heard that before.
Just letting you know.
But it is in Vancouver.
It is. Sorry, Maclean. That's deep analysis. That's the kind of deep analysis you expect from me here on the Hot Stove.
One of the hardest laughs I ever had watching the legislature was in the tribute speeches for then outgoing NDP MLA Jenny Kwan, who, besides being a very effective MLA, was known for her absolute just death stares, and was a very focused, determined, and yes, political MLA. And during his tribute speech to her, Mike DeYoung stood up and said, just paused for a minute and said, "Mount Pleasant." And the entire place just broke apart. It was genuinely funny. Anyway.
MDJ is good for that stuff. Like, he plays, I think, because of how long he's been in the House now, and the fact that he's always had a great sense of humor, and I think one of the better liked people on both sides of the aisle, maybe. He's not loathed. He's a bit like Farnworth. He's not loathed by either side. He gets away with that. He quoted some poem. I must admit, I sort of buzzed over me in the Twitter world, but I know Rob Shaw was really excited about it on Twitter, and it's just kind of classic MDJ, right?
Was it him that did the cremation of Sam McGee thing?
Yeah,
yesterday?
I believe so.
Okay.
I believe so.
Well, then full marks. The other by-election has not yet been called because the announcement was just yesterday. Surrey South MLA Stephanie Cadieux has announced that she will resign. She has not yet resigned her seat. I believe she has said it'll be at the end of the month. And the reason she is resigning is she's accepted a position as Canada's first disability chair. Chief Accessibility Officer. Yes, I beg your pardon. And that is, I've confused my words because I was going to say that she will go down in history as the first woman with a disability to serve in both the legislature and cabinet in BC. She is a trailblazer and is going to be blazing a new trail in Ottawa, and our congratulations to her. Does set up a more interesting and potentially competitive by-election. Obviously, it's a BC Liberal-held seat. They won it by something like 4 points in the last election. And I don't think, again, this just happened yesterday. There are no candidates lined up for any of the three parties that I'm aware of.
No. Well, let's just, before we move off Steph, I just want to say a few words because I know her well, have, watched her career progress. And, honestly, one of those folks who got into politics for all the right reasons. Just wanted to make life a little bit better for folks and worked hard to do it. I believe still the longest serving Minister of Children and Families in BC history. Rob Shaw's and Zussman's book, A Matter of Confidence, I believe people joke in there that somehow Steph was being punished by Christy Clark by being left in that ministry so long. But, was in it for the right reasons, tried her best to do the right things. I thought, of all those ministers, found a little bit of a niche easier than most after leaving government and becoming opposition. And well-deserved. Accessibility is an issue that has grown in people's minds and importance in recent years. It's going to continue to grow as we see Canada's demographics age. Accessibility isn't necessarily a physical disability issue. It can be an age issue. There's lots of things that kind of add into that. And I can't think of a better person to champion that cause than Steph. And congratulations to her in this step forward. Now we go to the by-election. There's all sorts of things swirling in this one. Obviously, let's say she leaves on April 30th, end of the month, as she said. Horgan would have 6 months to call the vote. There is a municipal vote in October that he will not want to collide with, I don't think. There's a complicating factor of Ginny Sims is widely rumored to be considering running for mayor. The cost of that, according to, look, I'm not going to pretend I have a bunch of NDP insiders on my Rolodex, but from what I understand from talking to people close to the NDP, if she wants to run for mayor, they would prefer her to resign beforehand and do so rather than be a distracted MLA.
Yeah, my understanding is it's not specific to Sims, but the preference is if you're going to leave to run for something, they want you to resign first.
Right. So, that could be a second by-election in Surrey that could happen. So, I imagine there's a lot of conversations with Ginny Sims right now this month, like, are you, aren't you? Are you going to stay or are you going to go? You're right, no candidates, but man, that riding will be a knife fight. Yeah, Surrey is ground zero for affordability issues.
Yes.
Gasoline, groceries, housing costs. I saw a stat that rent is up 60% in the past, or 20% in the past 60 days, or some crazy stat. Just it's unbelievable what's happening across the board. All of that will be in play. You'll have a Falcon who will likely be elected in the House. At first opportunity to win one back from the NDP. So, yeah, it'll be very interesting to see. I'm not sure when Horgan would do it. You don't usually want to do it in the summer by-elections, but are you going to rush it through and do it in June? That doesn't feel quite right to me in my mind either, but maybe? I'm not sure.
I could see all parties wanting this to happen after session because, as you say, quite rightly, this will be a hotly contested by-election. It could go either way, meaning either BC Liberal or NDP. And so both of them will be pouring a lot of resources at it, and in what we're saying here is essentially a lot of political staffers who would otherwise be very occupied with things like ministerial debates and estimates in the legislature. If the election happens after the session, it's easier for all parties, unless the NDP perceives an advantage in either going sooner or later. And I only mention the NDP because they can call the election and the BC Liberals can't.
Very true, very true. I'll give you a weird date to keep in mind. June 10th to 12th is BC Liberal Convention in Penticton. Would Horgan be that mean to rush a by-election call through to where all the BC Liberals are supposedly in Penticton? I don't know. My sense is they need to get ready too. No one. The Liberals may have had some heads up that Cadieux was considering this, but guaranteed the NDP did not. So this probably came as a surprise to them. So we'll see. It'll be a fascinating, crazy by-election. It'll be the most consequential one since the mother of all by-elections. We'll have to wait and see. But yeah, it's something. Who can you get? Who's the candidate that can run there? I know Suk Dhaliwal is putting together, it looks like, a group to run for mayor and council. Obviously, the McCallum folks are tied up, which I don't think the BC Liberals would want anyways. You have Brenda Locke's group out there. So that sucks up a lot of the political talent in Surrey when you have 3, 4, 5 different slates running. Who knows? I don't know. You just don't know who. Is this the Puneet Sander entry into?
Well, I was going to say that both of Falcon's co-chairs of his campaigns have strong Surrey ties. And you mentioned Puneet Sandar and Dianne Watts, who is the former mayor. Again, I haven't heard anything other than that there is no confirmed candidate. So if it's one of them, it's not the other.
The pressure on Dianne to run.
Yeah, I'm sure it's enormous.
Will be huge. I don't know. When I see Dianne, she seems so happy. So it makes me hard to imagine that she wants to go back into politics. She's on a couple of boards. I think she feels like she's doing work that's meaningful. I think she is. So I'm not sure whether, but then again, she's been the mayor. She's been an MP. MLA's the only thing she hasn't been. If Kevin Falcon forms government after the next election, she'd be a lock for cabinet.
Yes.
Definitely helps alter the face of the BC Liberals. Very well respected former mayor. The first female mayor of Surrey, I believe. So that's a lot to offer, and someone who has even now still a lot of political cachet, especially with the press gallery and folks. So, yeah, I mean, look, I'm talking you into it, Dianne. Run for Cadieux seat. What could go wrong?
Nothing other than probably a pay cut, exponentially longer hours, being subjected to the absolute sewer of toxicity that is social media, especially for female politicians. But other than that,
think of the Bonvoy points she'll get from staying at the Marriott every week, the Marriott Inner Harbor. I mean, the Bonvoy points alone, you'll be a platinum member in no time. It's you can avoid David Eby in the elevators. It'll be great.
They probably get along very well in the elevators. The big debate in the legislature this week, Jordan, has to do with, the overdose crisis. We talked about this a few episodes ago. The BC's chief coroner came out with a list of recommendations for how to proceed because 7 people a day are dying. And the BC Liberals and BC Greens have been very insistent that the Legislature Health Committee be struck with a view to we have these recommendations from the experts. How do we go about implementing them? There are very tight timelines involved. Some of them are, let's start moving by the end of April. The NDP disagreed and gave the Health Committee a much more broad mandate. This spurred something we don't see very often in the legislature. In fact, I struggle to think of another example. A joint press conference with the BC Liberals and BC Greens saying why they object to this and why the government isn't moving as quickly as it did on COVID-19. And there we still sit. This just happened yesterday, and the NDP isn't going to budge off their reasoning for sending the health committee off on a more broad, less focused mandate.
Yeah. First of all, you're right. It might be the first joint press conference since CASA in 2017. Can't think of another one. I can't think of another one that.
Well, there was a few in the whole Daryl Pluckus saga.
Oh, yes.
There were. But specifically just the BC Liberals and BC Greens. Yeah. I apologize if someone's going to send me a note saying, and I probably will remember it, but maybe Christy Clark and Andrew Weaver might have, now that I think about it, when she took up one of his bills. But other than that, I mean, the point is it's very rare.
Right, fair enough. The Health Committee. What do we say about the Health Committee? The point of reactivating the Health Committee was in order to get a handle, get everyone at the table, and try to, as the NDP are so desperate to do, depoliticize any criticism around the opioid overdose crisis. They bristle in the House whenever it's brought up, even though they themselves brought it up constantly when Christy Clark was Premier. But now the tables have turned and the rules have changed for them, and now they hate it being brought up by folks like Trevor Halford and Sonia Furstenau and Adam Olsen and Todd Stone. The reason why these other parties wanted this committee reactivated was to deal with this issue. Let's dig through it and figure out ways that we can actually make a difference here on the ground. And instead we get, I don't know how else you say it, but ass covering. It's pure butt covering by the NDP government. And this issue just deserves so much more than that. Look, the reason why you get, a government might get blamed for the overdose epidemic is because they themselves blamed a government when they were in opposition. But I think all parties were ready to move past that, or at least the BC Liberals and the Green Party, and try to find constructive solutions. And the NDP have decided, no, we're going to cling to the fiction that we know better than the people across the aisle. It's disappointing. Ultimately, it's not the BC Liberals who will be hurt. It's not the Green Party who will be hurt. It's probably not even the NDP that will be hurt. It'll be everyday British Columbians who are self-medicating, who are struggling. There was a study this week that came out that talked about the folks who are more prone to homelessness, and homelessness doesn't always equal addiction, but in this case there was a direct link. They're people who are self-medicating. They're in pain, often divorced men. Really interesting and frighteningly common scenarios
Yes.
Like, like I grew up in church, and the Bible verse there, "But for the grace of God goes I," was taught to me on flannel graph Sunday school. But for the grace of God go us, Maclean.
You're right.
We're that age demographic. I'd be a mess if my family broke up. I can't imagine having to deal with chronic pain. But for the grace of God go us.
Yeah, I mean, these drugs are literally designed to change the chemistry of your brain, and so addiction is a hard thing to get around once you're there. Especially, I mean, imagine if you've been prescribed it by your doctor. Yeah. And to your point, I think it was Daphne Bramham. I apologize if I'm wrong on the author, but it was in the Vancouver Sun earlier this week, looking at some of the victims of the overdose crisis and also homelessness. Yeah. And the phrase that kept coming up was disposable men, or men that had become disposable at some point in their lives. And I mean, that just struck me, because you're absolutely right. There is not a very long sequence of events from right here to becoming disposable that all of us face. Yeah. A few bad turns of luck, a couple poor decisions, or maybe just straight bad luck. Yeah. And you've become disposable. I certainly read that and felt less secure in my worldview, and also felt significantly more sympathy. Yeah.
I believe it was Douglas Todd, but who wrote it.
You're right. I apologize.
No worries. Daphne's also done important work on this file. Actually, ICBA, we have a wellness program. It's about 5,000 construction professionals who are in it. There's toolbox talks, other resources. ICBA itself, we're working through it. We're in month 10. And every week I've been writing at icbaindependent.ca some reflections on the wellness learning that week. And tomorrow's, it's Wellness Wednesday. Tomorrow I have one coming out. And, it talks about this. Like, this month is on pain avoidance. I think growing up, Maclean, you and I should speak for you, but growing up, I was taught, I kind of assumed through osmosis, through the DARE program, or Reagan's war on drugs, or all this stuff.
Just say no.
Just say no. This is your brain. This is your brain on crack. Yeah. The frying egg. I think I assumed that these people had some sort of moral failing. There was some sort of flaw in them that made them more susceptible, and that worldview has completely changed. Yeah. In recent years, and thank God, because it was wrong, and I don't like to be wrong. And you suddenly realize, there's nurture issues. There's the way people are raised. There's physical issues that can make you more prone. There's occupational hazards. Like, there's all these little threads that can pull you towards it. 5 years ago, I had a catastrophic leg issue, and I was in the hospital for a week and a bit. And one of the things they put me on was painkillers, morphine and fentanyl. Ooh. And Maclean, you feel so warm and fuzzy, and your emotions are close to the surface. And coming out of that experience, they kept me on for just as much time as I needed to, and thankfully the pain subsided. My foot is numb in the toes, which is better than chronic pain, so much better, obviously. So but coming out of that, I just, and dealing with working on this wellness program and whatnot, I just have such empathy for folks who are in that constant pain, and they know there's that relief, and then they'll do anything they can to get back to that, whether it's physical or emotional pain, or it just, disposable men. That was a term that should send a chill down our spines, and should be a message to the government and to this health committee, like, everything's on the table. Let's talk about this.
Yeah, you wrote really brilliantly on your experience with your injury and what almost happened to you. And if you have never read it and you're watching or reading this, please go look for it on the Orca. It's very personal and very well done. I think the other thing that you talked about, just say no and DARE and all these things that we grew up with. The other thing that really strikes me is we all know somebody, and maybe it's you and me, but I mean, I can think of friends right now who have said things like, NFL player X or Hollywood star B has admitted they have a drug problem and is seeking help, and they'll say, oh, how brave, good for them. And then the next day they'll see somebody on the street shooting up and think that's a degenerate. Mm-hmm. How dare they? And it's like, well, they just didn't have the same support network. What's really the difference? Yeah, it's one thing to be seeking help and be celebrated for it when you're a celebrity, and it's another thing to be, condemned for falling through the cracks when you are disposable.
Yeah, and it comes back to a term that I know some on the center-right bristle at, but it comes back to privilege, right?
Yeah.
Some people have the privilege in their life to get the help they need and have the resources to make it happen, and other people do not, and there's knocks against them. And I'm not saying that, there's opportunities for everyone in life, but sometimes some folks have to start the race so much further back than others. It's very difficult to wrap your head around that. So, yeah, it's not good. I really hope the health committee, I hope Stone and First to Know is very pointed, but I thought very fair critique. I don't think they were partisan in their comments. I don't think they were over the top of their comments. I think they were begging the government to let them help. And I'm hopeful that someone in government, Adrian Dix, one of the things that Adrian Dix has said over and over again is that the nonpartisan nature of the response to COVID in British Columbia was one of the key factors of making things great. Making things better than they were in other places. Norm Spector would disagree that things are better than other places. But nonetheless, in Adrian Dix's little mind, he thinks, not little, but big mind, he thinks this is...
Very big.
He's he's a smart guy. He thinks that, the nonpartisan, do the same for this.
Yeah.
Like,
well, that's the frustrating thing. Is we just went through, I've seen a number of responses to what happened yesterday saying, well, it's the government that does these things. So, why is the opposition, both opposition parties, why are they even trying? And it's like, we just did this. We just did this 2 years ago, where I think everyone agrees, and you can point to concrete examples of times when, the governing party worked with the opposition parties on things like joint town halls, saying, guys, this is not a political issue. Like, this is the best advice as we know how right now to what to do, and then later on to encourage people to get vaccinated. And there's lots of other little small examples, probably dozens more that I don't even know about. Mm-hmm. But the point is when faced with a public health crisis, working together, we know it works well. And this is a worse public health crisis in terms of the death toll. So again, it's just so maddening and frustrating that we can't get similar levels of cooperation here.
Look, and politically, it's stupid. Go out there, be the government that brings these other ideas in and solve or make a dent in the problem, and you'll get that same kind of bump you got during wave 1 of COVID when we're making shoes for public health officers. You can do it again. You can actually, it's almost like lightning is striking twice. Seize it. But that does tell me, Maclean, that I don't think the Dix view of the world or the Dix view of this is in control in the NDP caucus or NDP cabinet or in the Premier's office. I think there is a very different kind of group of folks who are in control of the agenda. Otherwise, my general sense is, politicians go back to what's worked before. Mm-hmm. Dix would go back to what's worked before. But I don't know if it's the fact that there's this Ministry of Air that really does nothing and is providing no real value, if it's a minister who doesn't have the clout within cabinet, if it's just, someone in the Premier's office decided just deflect on this as long as possible. No one, or even more simply, maybe no one really cares enough about this to make a big deal, to make it an electoral issue. Whatever it is, it's very clear that nonpartisan view of tackling this has disappeared.
Well, even if you look at this really cynically, and I'm going to apologize for even speaking this out aloud, if the government was worried that the opposition parties would glom credit for some success on stemming, even not stopping the overdose crisis, again, look at the pandemic. Mm-hmm. That is not what happened. the BC Liberals and BC Greens did not benefit politically from cooperating with the government, especially so in the BC Liberals case. So, if that's the reticence, just look at the recent history. I understand there is always going to be reluctance, especially for radical solutions. I know from talking to people across Canada that no government wants to be the first to decriminalize drugs or things like that, because that step will be enormously unpopular with certain segments of the population. But spreading out the political risk, saying, well, these guys that you might vote for, they fully supported it, and you went to the same town hall where they were there saying, yes, we need to do this, it would diffuse the risk. Again, I'm just kind of baffled by this.
No, with you, 100% with you. There's nothing else to say. It's stupid politics, it's bad public policy, it's terrible governance, and it's a poor example of very poor leadership from the NDP. Engage these other folks. It doesn't make any sense not to.
Well, again, you said it best. We agree. We talked about this briefly last week. I just wanted to touch on it again. The cooling off period bill.
I've been on pins and needles, Maclean, waiting for this update because I'm sure they've fleshed out details of this bill now and explained things, and there's probably extra pages and amendments and whatnot. Any extra clarity?
No, not yet. Well, we know it'll happen when the bill is passed at some point. The thing is, Jordan, I think we were just talking about being cynical. I believe the government knows what the cooling off period will be. It's a X number of days, and it's not set in stone. But basically, again, I don't understand why they wouldn't just put that in the legislation beforehand. I mean, they're not incompetent enough to introduce the legislation now and then not set the time period until like August. There's no way. So obviously, like the FOI fee, it will be done more or less immediately after the bill passes.
Yeah, and Les Lane had a piece in the Times Calls today that talked about some sort of, I'm going to use the term public input very loosely because it was like 140 folks on a call. And they're waiting for the report in order to form the regulatory for the legislation that's already in place, but they can't do it before, it's a whole thing. The cooling off period is interesting because I've talked to a few different developers about this, and they do not agree as to what's going to happen on this. Now, Carol James, there's a mindset. I believe Selena Robinson said this isn't about reducing prices. Even though they've been telling Justin McElroy and other folks over and over again, cooling off period is part of our plan to reduce prices. Now that they're actually done it, they realize it's not going to. But there's kind of two schools of thought. One is some developers are like, no, it's fine. I can deal with that. It makes sense. If it's 7 days, say, sure, you can bring, it's a big purchase. Sometimes people get caught up in it. 7 days might be fine. We can deal with that. It won't have much of an effect. Then other people say, well, hang on. If you have multiple, what's to stop a buyer from putting in multiple offers on multiple properties during those 7 days and then canceling the 4 of the 5 they don't want? If that's happening, anytime you increase offers in the real estate ecosystem, the prices go up because everyone's trying to outbid each other. Mm-hmm. And this will actually have the opposite effect. Renee Merrifield is a part of that camp as far as, this will actually drive up costs. I'm not sophisticated enough in property development and how these things sell to tell you what the correct answer is. But I do know that actually having some guts to the bill would be helpful for the pros who would like to analyze this, who make a living analyzing this kind of public policy. That would be very helpful and could give both the government and the opposition some ideas as to what's going to work and what's not and what the unintended consequences might be. But obviously the NDP don't care about those consequences, intended or unintended. They just want to ram this through so they have their cabinet has more power to do stuff. I will remind you, this is the same government that the Canadian Association of Journalists, not Jordan, not the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, not the Independent Contractors and Business Association, the Canadian Association of Journalists, not exactly known as rabid right-wingers, mind you. The Canadian Association of Journalists gave them the Code of Silence Award as, for outstanding achievement in government secrecy, calling them one of the most secretive governments, or the most secretive government in Canada. This just reinforces how true that is.
The thing about the cooling off period, setting aside the fact that we don't know what the period will be, et cetera, and so forth, having just gone through the real estate process myself last year.
Listen to Daddy Warbucks over here, guys.
Right. The one thing that a cooling off period would not do is protect you as someone who's bidding for a home against somebody who is rushing a no conditions offer with no inspection. We're not making any of these sort of checks on the process mandatory. We're just sort of saying if the person makes an unconditional offer, they can back out, which is great for them. It's terrible for you if you're going in with conditions like financing, and of course you'll want a home inspection, and because you're sane. But it's actually making it easier to rush in where angels fear to tread. Make an unconditional offer, and then any reason you want it all 7 days later, pull out. I actually agree with the realtors on this, just from my own experience alone, that this is there are people that this will help, but I don't see this cooling down the market at all.
No, I don't either. Realtors will also find ways around this through different offer structures. it's not uncommon. How we got our house a couple of years ago is there was an accepted offer on it, and we made a second offer, kind of a backup offer for the homeowners. And part of it was when they signed it, there was a clause in ours saying under no circumstances could they extend the terms of the first offer. And so we paid a few $1,000s more. I think it would be not much more than the other offer was. But then they were secretly hoping the first offer would fall through because we were willing to pay a little bit more, and it did, and we got the place. So realtors, like, they do this 24/7. So David Eby wakes up and thinks about the cabinet meeting he's got to go to, Treasury Board, being an MLA, what's going on at home, what's happening with ICBC. He thinks he's got like 40 files. Realtors eat, live, breathe, die this stuff. Oh my gosh, they will parse this. They will figure out every angle. And of course they do. It's their livelihood. They spend all day doing it, every day doing it. It's a hugely competitive market, so the smart ones rise to the top. This is why you kind of want to give as much detail as possible so you can get some decent analysis from people both pro and con, so you can see where the loopholes are going to be and how to stop them before it starts.
Yeah, and there's already a cooling off period built in. It's called making conditional offer, and there's any number of reasons a condition cannot be met. Your own financing, you can say, did not come through, and that's the way you cool off. Anyway, that's all I want to talk about real estate this week. Okay. We will close this week by talking, since we are fated to live under the ongoing specter of never-ending leadership races. And there will be another one after this one, I'm sure. In this case, the Conservative Party of Canada and Pierre Poilievre. Jordan, what have you heard?
Well, BC has become a hotbed. This seems to be the month where the candidates are coming out. Patrick Brown, I hear, was in town on the weekend.
I didn't even know that.
He's kind of snuck in, I believe. Did a lot of work in Surrey. Talked with folks there, and basically, meeting, little event, meeting, bigger event, like just kind of stacked right up. Pierre Poilievre is in BC later this week. He's got an event at the Croatian Cultural Center. He's got an event in Prince George. I'm told in the first 48 hours in Prince George, his rally already has 400 registrations. Pretty good for a city of 100,000 people in the first 48 hours. That's just going to continue to grow. I saw on her Twitter feed Leslyn Lewis is coming in this weekend, or maybe next weekend, doing some event in Abbotsford and some other places. And then we have Jean Charest. Jean Charest, who sent out an email saying he's going to have a BC Zoom call. No, he's not coming. He's just going to have a Zoom call for BC supporters. And he wanted us to know, in the email, his campaign manager or whoever used the term, the Charest campaign is functioning on all cylinders. Maclean, what an inspiring state of affairs there are. I mean, functioning on all cylinders. I mean, Charest seems like the electric vehicle kind of guy to me anyways, car probably doesn't have cylinders. But nonetheless, he is functioning on all of them, a term that I've never heard. I've heard firing on all cylinders, never heard functioning on all cylinders, and hardly one that builds much excitement. And the fact that he can't be bothered to come out here, but he's doing a Zoom BC call. Do better, Jean. Do better.
Yeah, I mean, the word functioning, functional, it's not a word you want to be described as when you're trying to, if your wife ever describes you as functional, that's probably not a great thing. It's adequate, might be a synonym. Getting by.
He's functioning within normal parameters, Maclean.
Yes, exactly. It's, meeting expectations. It's better to not be better than not being functional, but yeah, no, it's unfortunate. Jean Charest kind of seems fated to have one of those campaigns like Peter MacKay did in the last Conservative leadership race, with little snafus like this, or Stéphane Dion in a general election a few cycles ago, doing horribly badly lit Zoom calls. It
feels like a guy who's rusty. It feels like yesterday's man. And let me just take a second here to say, Jean Charest's been out of politics about as long as Kevin Falcon was. Falcon's campaign did not feel like this. Falcon's campaign did not feel like, there was, in the early debates, I think it took him a while, to get up to speed and whatnot on kind of, but not by the standards of the other candidates, by his own standard. And Falcon hit the hustings. The speeches got better and better. I just don't see that coming from Surrey. It's just
and to use that same comparison, because they were out at the same amount of time, Falcon was a cabinet minister and ran in a provincial leadership campaign beforehand. Mm-hmm. Jean Charest was the leader of a national party and the premier of one of the second biggest province. I mean, this man has seen fully functional campaigns up close and personal before. I mean, yes, he's rusty, but he also should know what a good campaign looks like. It's just, it's hard to understand what's going on there.
Yeah, and look, he can't come to BC. He's not going to be able to get, like, if Poilievre has 1,000 people in the room in the Croatian Center in Vancouver and 1,000 in Prince George, like, there's something brewing there, right?
Yeah.
Jean Charest, I'm not sure you could draw 1,000 people for Jean Charest anywhere in BC at any time. Like, I'm just not sure where these possible supporters are. So we'll see. Maybe I'm wrong. And look, I've been wrong many times. I'll be wrong many times more. But something about this campaign doesn't feel like it's functioning on all cylinders to me.
You'll say that at least one more time before we close out today, I'm sure. That said, I'm probably not going to give you another chance because that is all I had for this week. Do you have anything else you want to add for our good viewers?
3 weeks from today, I meet the man, Russell Wilson. I was thinking of starting out like this, Maclean. So, Russ comes on and says, so Russ, just a quiet, normal, uneventful off season for you, huh, bud? And then maybe go from there and recap. Yeah. We have
uneventful except for him, I assume, also dipping into the real estate market and comparing house prices in Denver versus Seattle. We've longtime viewers will know that I am a lifelong Broncos fan, so I'm tickled pink or orange as it were, but I don't. There will be some disappointed Seahawks fans there.
Yeah, I think the shock's worn off. Yeah. And we're going to pitch it early on as like, this is a celebration of his 10 years in Seattle, taking the franchise to heights never seen before. It's really a thank you to a guy who did a lot for Seahawks, the fans, 12s, Seattle in general, Pacific Northwest. I'm hoping our guys are good. Behave yourselves there, ICBAers.
Was the Seahawks Super Bowl win? Was that Seattle's first major sports championship? Did the Supersonics ever win anything? I'm asking. I don't know. Did the Mariners?
Mariners have never won. The Sonics
might have back in the day.
In the 70s. The Sounders have won stuff.
Okay, and in Seattle that probably counts. But I mean, the point I'm making is that Russell Wilson, they are legitimately popular in Seattle.
Yeah.
Russell Wilson is probably the single most successful and important sports figure in Seattle history. And so, yeah, you're right. And there's also an understanding, like, look, this is professional sports. They go, these things happen.
Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit about how they turned the culture around in Seattle. Seattle used to be a pretty sad sack. Then they had the decent run under Mike Holmgren, and Sean Alexander, and Matt Hasselbeck. But they'd kind of fallen behind again, and then lo and behold, they catch lightning in a bottle. The same draft, they picked Bobby Wagner, who became the anchor of their defense for so many years, and Russell Wilson, who became their star quarterback. And in the same offseason, both those guys moved on.
Once-in-a-lifetime stuff.
Yeah.
What is not once in a lifetime is this show. We will be back next week, hopefully on Tuesday again. He's Jordan Bateman. I'm Maclean K. Happy politics.